My name is Ted Lee. I am the editor-in-chief of JEMS, and along with Jeff Frankel, our managing editor, we are bringing you industry leaders and experts to talk about hot topics and contributions to JEMS in various aspects and topics impacting EMS. Today we have a special guest, Dr. George Hatch Jr., the Executive Director of the Committee on Accreditation of Educational Programs of the Emergency Medical Service Professions. So welcome, Dr. Hatch. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Ted. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Thanks for the invitation.
So just to give our audience a little background, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your EMS career?
Yeah, wow. I'm thinking back on that. I started as an EMT in 1977, so it may be before you were born. I don't know. I'm not quite sure about that. But
1970. I was 7 years old.
all right. So I'm an EMS lifer, but I didn't know that I was going to get into EMS, and it all happened because my dad, who was a high school coach, was painting our house, fell off of a roof 40 feet to the ground, and the guys that went and picked him up that Sunday morning were EMTs, probably on a funeral home ambulance, a high top Suburban. They picked him up, they threw him in the back of the ambulance, and they drove really fast to the hospital. And that was my introduction to EMS. And so over the years since that time, I've gotten into, stayed in EMS and became a paramedic in the second class of our EMS service in Galveston, Texas. We've got the oldest medical school in the state of Texas that was there. I was taught by physicians back in 1978, 1979. Worked as a paramedic for Galveston EMS, the city of Galveston, for about 7 years, and then went to work for Houston Community College. And I went there with no degree, no thought that I originally was going to be a school teacher, but went to work at the college. We had a contract with the Houston Fire Department to do all of the education and continuing education for their employees, which number now about 3,500. So we had an impact on a very large city EMS system in the fire department and the fire service. And I went back to school, got 3 degrees from the University of Houston. And when this job came open in 2007, I applied through a national search, and I've been here for the last 17 years. So that's my EMS career pretty much in a Reader's Digest format.
Well, great. Yeah, thank you for your service and quite a long career in EMS. So what is the Committee on Accreditation of Educational Programs?
Yeah, I asked that question myself. As I said, I started in 1977 as an EMT, and a little beknownst to me, in 1978, this organization was actually chartered. There were some forefathers in EMS that represented 3 or 4 different national EMS groups, and they thought about accreditation. It was being done at that time sort of globally by the American Medical Association. And at that time, the AMA was heavily involved in the accreditation of not just EMS, but in many other aspects of healthcare. And that went on. The group was chartered in 1978. And you can see we're, in the next couple of years, approaching 50 years of being around. Back then, when I was a paramedic on an ambulance, I didn't think about what accreditation was. And so it wasn't until I got here, or actually when I was in the educational realm, that I started thinking about accreditation. And we had, at the time, 5 programs here in Texas that were, or 4 programs that were accredited. They were all in higher education venues. And so I talked to some colleagues at the time that were running those programs, and that kind of led me to the accreditation space. So fast forward, the Committee on Accreditation of Educational Programs for the EMS Professions currently represents us having oversight of about 800 paramedic programs around the United States and one outside of the United States in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, at a university there. The Committee on Accreditation is made up of 12 sponsor organizations. There are physician sponsor organizations like the American College of Cardiology, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the National Association of EMS Physicians, and that's to name a few. And then on the EMS side, you've got the National Association of EMTs, the National Registry of EMTs, the International Association of Firefighters, and so forth. So we have 12 different sponsor organizations that intersect with EMS, and those sponsor organizations come to the table. They have 2 representatives that we elect to our board of directors, and they are responsible for the oversight of the organization. Their fiduciary responsibility not just involves sort of how the organization runs, but they're the actual horsepower that on a quarterly basis, they're the ones that are evaluating whether paramedic education programs meet the standards for CAHEP. Now, I mentioned CAHEP, and I want to take a step back. CAHEP is the Commission on Accreditation of Allied Health Education Professions. CAHEP is actually the programmatic accreditor. So we hear sometimes that the CoAEMSP or CoAEMSP is the accreditor, and that's not the case. CAHEP is actually the accreditor for your paramedic education program. But what I do tell people is that we at the CoAEMSP, we are the ones that do the heavy lifting for CAHEP. So we're the ones that staff on the EMS side. We're a separate organization from CAHEP, but we're under this umbrella with 31 or 33 other allied health professions, healthcare professions that CAHEP accredits. And so we've gone from being a really, really small committee on accreditation, and I'm happy to tell you that we're the largest committee on accreditation under this umbrella of CAHEP. But it's actually our board of directors and our staff that evaluate the programs. We are the ones that make a recommendation to CAHEP's board of directors about the accreditation status of your paramedic education program. And we're the ones that really have more of the day-to-day contact with someone. Like Ted calls up and says, "Hey, George, I've got a question about the self-study," or "I'm not really sure how I should answer this response that you're asking us about for a progress report for our accreditation status. It's coming up this quarter." So CAHEP, again, has the oversight. They have the final say on a recommendation from our board of directors as to the accreditation status of your program. And I would also tell you what I've learned is it's not just a rubber stamp thing. I mean, the audience out there is trying to figure out, okay, well, if I don't know a whole lot about accreditation, if you guys do all the work and you say, "Hey, Ted's program is good to go and it should receive accreditation status," or "Ted's program's got a problem and we're recommending that we place the program on probation or even withdraw accreditation from the educational program," what happens there? And I can tell you that what I've learned is, and I knew this already, but it's good to see it in place, that CAHEP's board of directors doesn't just rubber stamp this. And in fact, when we send recommendations on a quarterly basis back to CAHEP, they have questions many times. I can tell you every quarter that we send programs, they don't necessarily go in there clean without someone else looking at those programs and saying, "We got a question about that. We're not really sure. Is this what you're asking? Or could this be worded differently?" The reason that's important, I think, Ted, is because when you look at a paramedic program or any educational program online and you're going in, and if you're an employer and you're saying, "Hey, I want to send my students to Ted's program," or I'm Ted the student and I'm looking at investing in sending myself to a school locally or even perhaps out of school or in state someplace, and I want to make sure that my dollars and my time are going to be well spent. If I look at a program and I don't see that it's up to snuff or it's up to speed, or if I see, hey, it looks to be really stellar, that's where I want to invest my time. CAHEP is important because they want to make sure that Joe and Jane public can look at a program and they can understand this program has issues or this program seems to be going in the right direction. And that's where it's probably a good investment of your time and a good investment of your money to go to school there.
So accreditation is, and correct me if I'm wrong or not phrasing it quite right. It helps with oversight and kind of standard setting so that there is consistency and quality in programs.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. There are standards. The standards are CAHEP standards, but I can tell you that the EMS community has an opportunity every 5, but no more than 10 years when we open up the standards for a revision, which we just went through. There's a multi-step process that goes through that, and those standards are what your paramedic education program is going to be benchmarked against. They're not going to be benchmarked. Ted's program is not going to be benchmarked against George's program. And our 2 programs are not going to be benchmarked against someone else's program. They're each going to be uniquely benchmarked against the CAHEP standards. And so when you look at the standards, there's multiple different areas. One of those is sponsorship. So we have most of our programs are in educational institutions, community colleges, junior colleges, technical colleges, universities. Those meet a sponsorship requirement because they have an institutional accreditor. You went to school, you've kind of done that like I have, but you don't necessarily think about your institution, the university that you went through, or the community college locally that you went through. You don't think about the institutional accreditation status, but there's actually an institutional accreditation for colleges and universities. And they look at sort of the global 360 degree view of your program, but they're also looking at it from an institutional perspective. How healthy is the institution financially? Do they have all the resources that they need? We're actually doing sort of a deeper dive on the programmatic side. So that's what's important here. We're actually looking at the program. We're not looking at the institution. But again, going back to sponsorship type, we have colleges and universities that meet the requirement. We have hospital-based programs that meet the requirement. We have governmental entities. These could be city and county EMS agencies that sponsor their paramedic education program. These could be city or county fire departments that sponsor their paramedic education program. And we also have federal programs. We actually have 2 military programs, one at the Joint Special Operations Base at Fort Bragg. I'm not sure what they're calling it now. I apologize. They've changed the name, but Fort Bragg in North Carolina, where the Joint Special Forces train. And we have another program at the Army Combat Paramedic Schoolhouse at Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio, Texas. So we have federal programs. And then a last but not least category would be a consortia. And a consortia is where, I'll use this as an example, Ted and George's Most Excellent Paramedic School. Okay. We are not institutionally accredited. We don't meet any of the requirements for sponsorship as defined by CAHEP. And so we want to keep teaching paramedics, and we do a pretty good job. And we think we do a really good job, but we don't meet any of these requirements. We go out and we might partner with other entities that do meet that requirement. We might partner up with a city fire department. We might partner up with a hospital. We might partner up with a college or university that doesn't have a paramedic program. And collectively, we pool our resources, and there's oversight to make that sponsor go. But at the end of the day, I think that one is important. It's a little bit more nuanced. If you don't have the resources there, it can't just be George and Ted calling the shots all the time here. It actually runs because we have somebody that makes it run based on their sponsorship criteria. And that's a lot to think about there, but it's a pretty important category. And we actually have more of those types of programs than any other committee on accreditation that falls under the CAHEP umbrella. So that's sort of the sponsorship thing in a nutshell.
So it's not like a one size fits all. It's unique to the needs of the community or the state or the region, um, based on what's available there.
Yeah, I think that's an important component also, because again, when I came here 17 years ago, we had about 220 paramedic programs, and they were in different areas, and they were in different categories. And I think again, one of the things that I've learned, the standards speak to multiple different ways that an educational program is organized. And I think as a credit to people in our profession, um, we've been able to see and realize and actualize all of those different paramedic programs that are unique to a particular community have been able to find a home. And again, by doing that, I think we've grown not just from a numbers perspective, but I think uniquely we're sort of in a leadership role within the CAHIP system. And people are looking at us. How do you do a lot of the things that you do? People were not asking us necessarily when I first started here. It's been a pretty exciting time, and I think what it shows is um, paramedic programs can be taught in a lot of different facilities. They don't have to just reside in a college or university. We heard that before. Oh, you can only do this if they're in a college and university, and that's simply not the case. What it does say is there has to be a tie to an educational outcome. And those paramedic programs that are in hospitals or city or county EMS agencies or fire departments or even consortia, or our federal partners, they have to have a pathway for graduates of that program to gain college credit. And most of the way that that's done is through an articulation agreement. So if you went to a college and university, they award college credit. But if you go to a program that doesn't necessarily reside in a college or university, they have to have that connection so that young people that graduate from these programs, whether it's 6 months from now or 6 months or 6 years from now, when they graduate, they may decide, you know what? I want to go back and I want to formalize my degree. I want to go into a supervisory role. Maybe I want to go on outside of EMS, and I want to go to nursing school or to PA school, or I want to go to medical school. They want to be able to realize the education that they captured as a paramedic has value, and they can partner that and actually get a college get those hours transcripted, and hopefully a college looks at that and says, yeah, we can give them college credit for this, and that's transferable. So I think that's really important also. People may not be thinking about that right now, but I would also tell you that when I was that age and I was going through paramedic school, I didn't know what I didn't know. So
Right.
we're trying to make sure that we protect the student as well.
So you talk about longevity of this and impacting careers. The reach is, you said, over 800 programs now,
Yeah.
across the United States. So what role or what impact can the Committee on Accreditation have on the future of EMS? I mean, we're talking about it. There's a lot of concern about, do we have enough paramedics? Do we have enough providers? Is this are we going in the right direction? Kind of what role do you see CoAMPS having in that, and what are you guys doing about that?
Yeah, great question. I would like to say that I think we've already made an impact, and to see the numbers of paramedic education programs rise from around 220 to nearly 800, just shy of 800 right now, and more programs coming to us every month, either asking about how do I start a program or what's the next step. We're seeing 3 to 5 new programs come to us every single month, Ted. We, over the last 2 years, we've added each of those years 30 new programs to this process, where they're going through the process and eventually gaining, in most cases, they're gaining CAHIP accreditation, and they continue. Um, so I think that we've had an impact. I mean, the outcomes showing that students are gainfully employed. So these are metrics that the U.S. Department of Education asks for all programs, all, not just paramedic programs, but educational programs inside healthcare, outside of healthcare. They want to know about, do students pass placement exams? I mean, job exams in terms of like licensing, right? So do they pass a national or a state licensing exam? And in our case, that's the National Registry of EMTs paramedic exam. Some states still have their state exam, but the students that graduate from there still have the opportunity to take a national licensing exam that gives them portability. So do they pass a national or a state exam? Do they get a job? And how many people start and how many people finish an educational program? All right. So back to the workforce question, these last several years, particularly with COVID, the National Registry reports out that they are still seeing increasing numbers of graduates at all levels, not just paramedic, not just advanced EMT, but EMT and EMR. There are more people graduating and taking those licensing or certification exams than ever before. So I don't think it's a question of how many students are graduating. Is sort of the accreditation process one of the reasons why that might not be happening? I don't think that that's the case. What I will tell you is just sort of a teaser here. We've been talking about it since we were asked about it in late 2018, but in 2019, the National EMS Scope of Practice was published. And one of the things that was published in there that we were asked about, could we do this, was could the COA, EMSP, and CAHEP, if NHTSA was to mention in that scope of practice document in 2019 that's been published, if they were to mention voluntary accreditation at the advanced EMT level, would that be something that you guys could take on? And the answer was, we're going to have to study that. Well, we did start studying that, and then COVID happened and we kind of got shut down from that. But I would tell you, we're on the uptick. We put that group back together again, and we are continuing down this continuum of gathering information, working on our materials, and we believe that we're going to be in a position to launch voluntary, and I want to underline voluntary accreditation at the advanced EMT level for AEMT education programs that are out there. Some of those might currently reside in existing paramedic programs, right? It's sort of another thing that you do. It's an offering that you already have. And how would you go about adding accreditation at the advanced EMT level to what it is that you already do? So that's one thing. But there are existing advanced EMT programs out throughout the United States that don't have any connection to an accredited paramedic program right now. So there may be as many as 500 plus advanced EMT programs alone that are out there across the United States that would benefit from the accreditation process. Now, that doesn't mean that states are going to mandate this. Doesn't mean that we're going to mandate this. We will have that process in place to address those programs that come forward at the advanced EMT level. But again, back to your original question, I think that's the type of stuff that the CoAEMSP is in a position to be able to help leverage to improve educational outcomes for advanced EMT students across the United States. Right now, nobody's really looking at that. So I think that's another thing, another value added proposition that we're bringing to the table.
Now, of course, for those of us in EMS, we know the different levels and stuff. So I'm just as a last question, I'm going to throw this out. If we're accrediting paramedic programs and we're voluntarily potentially accrediting advanced EMT programs, what about EMT programs?
Yeah, well, I used to have really dark hair, and this job's made my hair gray. What I would say, that's a great question. There is no plan in the future that I can see, not any time in the future, near future, that anyone's probably got an appetite for looking at EMT programs and going through an accreditation process. I'll say a couple things though. Number one, the way EMT programs are structured, and just in terms of the numbers of hours, clock hours, they're typically rated in clock hours. And if you had a college setting, most EMT programs are going to be about 4 to 5 semester credit hours for an EMT program. Okay. So when you look at the number of hours that they have in the accreditation realm, there's probably not, there's not enough meat on the bone for CAHEP to say, yes, we could accredit EMT programs. However, in the future, way down the line, I think perhaps decades or more down the line, as we progress along this, I think the question will percolate, what about EMT programs, and how would the EMS profession look at that? I mean, you know this yourself, Ted, there's probably dozens and dozens more EMT programs per capita than there are AEMT programs or paramedic programs. And you know, I was one of those people that was leading an EMT program at a local community college, and you know, we were doing other stuff, including paramedic. But when you think about this, EMT programs perhaps are the least resourced and the least prepared in some instances to take on a level of responsibility that accreditation kind of is asking you to do. There'd have to be a lot of lead up to this. There'd have to be a lot of consensus, I believe, nationally, really to have an appetite to do that. So I think if there were to be EMT accreditation way in the future, it'll be somebody else sitting here talking to you about it. Do I think it may have value? Absolutely. Because I think if you can translate, do I have the resources to be able to deliver solid education to the students that are sitting in my classroom, then I think the answer is yes, accreditation makes a difference. But you got to have, I think you have to have some sort of balance there also. And I think maturation wise, EMS is going to continue to evolve. We're going to continue to mature. And I think those people in the future, in 2050 and beyond, that might be looking at accreditation at the EMT level, that's something they're going to have to wrestle with. But I wish that I was going to be around maybe in 2050 to see that. I don't think I'll be here.
Well, just, you know, to your point, though, a lot of programs that are either paramedic, which are accredited, or ones that would be going through the voluntary advanced EMT, they probably have a baseline EMT program somewhere in there. So they are working towards kind of the same standards, and the same equipment is used, the same structure is used. So, you know, like you mentioned, you know, close to 800 programs are probably already working towards this goal at the EMT level anyway. So
yeah, I hope so. Because I think it does translate. I mean, the things that we're doing at the paramedic level really kind of can be passed down. You're still going to be tracking students' performance.
right.
You still want to be able to know that the medical director is actively engaged and involved with the students at all levels, that they know who the medical director is, and the medical director kind of has a vague, if nothing else, an understanding of what it is their responsibilities are, and how involved they can be at the EMT level. That's a whole nother question. But I do think it's important. And again, I think these are all factors, these are components of the accreditation process that will translate and do translate.
That's great. Well, I wanted to thank you for your time. It was great talking with you. I hope everybody that listens in has a better understanding of what accreditation means, and, you know, the fact that, you know, we went from 200 and some odd programs early on to close to 800 programs now, and working towards the advanced EMT, that, you know, the educational platform working into emergency medical services as a whole is strong, and is working very hard towards, you know, our needs. Would you like to say anything else in
so
closing?
I didn't know. I didn't know if that was a yes, absolutely. I'm sorry. So Ted, thank you so much for having me. I am proud to have been in emergency medical services my entire career. I think it has been rewarding. I hope that next generation of EMTs and AEMTs and paramedics are as excited about EMS as I was. and that they're going to be lifers like you and I are. And you know, that's important to all of us, because we're going to eventually be consumers of EMS. And I think we owe it to not just ourselves, but to that next generation of students and those who graduate and take care of us and our family members. It's going to be really, really important. So again, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. And I'm happy to talk with you again if the opportunity arises in the future.
Yes, of course. You're always welcome on the JEMS Report. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Ted.